So hopefully we can get a scratch coat on, and then overnight it'll firm up enough for you guys to put a float coat or a levelling coat on, which then will give you an idea of what the finished coat will be like. So I think the weather's working with us. So
yeah, and tomorrow I think is supposed to be just a continuation of what it is now.
yeah, but obviously the ambient temperature it's completely different.
Yeah, and you can feel the moisture in here.
Yeah, humidity is supposedly around 50%, which is
Okay,
bad.
so
I mean,
it's one of those things. It's kind of a catch-22 because there's nothing you can do about the humidity unless you completely seal the building up and take all the air out of it and work in a vacuum,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in a spacesuit. Then you're not gonna control. You know, it's kind of like I feel silly sometimes talking about it. Oh, humidity is quite an important thing, and then everybody's like, "That boy's an idiot." It's always going to be humidity. It's true, you know. But it will affect the curing time of the plaster. So that's what you have to be aware of. And sometimes, which we may get up here, you'll have, as John was saying earlier, you'll have 1 square feet or 2 square feet of the same wall that you've been working on, curing up for no known reason apart from annoying the bejesus out of you.
Yeah.
And you'll be like, why is that going like that? And this one I can put my finger through still over here. And that's, you know, that's a kind of a common thing. It may have to do with the laths, the background, but it's a weird, strange thing that you will probably come across. You'll do some work and you'll wait 2 days and it'll be ready, and you'll do some work and it'll be 2 weeks and it still hasn't kind of cured up enough to put a following coat on. You know, which for a contractor is a nightmare. You know, kind of get onto a job site and then, oh, I can't work. I have to get demobilised, come back in 2 days, demobilised. You know, so thickness, which I think we talked about a little bit earlier, helps, and evenness. I've always found if you're a rough plasterer, if you can't do it at an even thickness, if you can't keep it relatively even through your plastering, you're going to struggle, because that even a minor deviation in thickness can cause problems with curing. So, and that's why we have things like the feather edges just to screed up, which I'll show you later, and just keep everything kind of. And then I use these, which are substitutes of wooden floats, which are the traditional way of doing it, but
that's styrofoam?
they're polyurethane.
Okay.
Nice and light.
Nice and light. So yes, if you believe me, I used to use wooden floats. If you have something that's 14 centimetres by 28 centimetres and made out of oak, and you're trying to do a 200 square foot ceiling, doing that above your head after 10 minutes, you don't want it. With these, it's much more useful. They also don't draw out the moisture as much because there's no natural suction in them. So everybody says you should use a cross-grain float. If you can find one in the United States of America, please call me immediately and I will buy every single one that you can find, because I can't. They always have the long grain float, and the long grain float will raise the plaster to the surface rather than compress it down.
Yeah, it's like reverse grain.
It's so what you're actually doing when you're doing the rubbing up and floating it up, you're actually pulling the binder out of the plaster to the surface, which is destroying the work that you've just done. So the cross grain doesn't do that. But these, I find, these are quite hard to find. You can get them on eBay though, and places like that. They're about $14 maybe. I bring hundreds of them from the UK in a big box, but So if you can't find any anywhere, you can always just call Christian and I can arrange to have some dropped off at the office. So that's, and then hopefully tomorrow we'll get the levelling coat, the brown coat on some areas so you guys can see the difference. And then we devil float that usually. It's probably quite appropriate for the graves luncheon. Which basically is, I use the same float again. and put screws in it so that there's a little
Bump
shot.
there.
So,
Oh, wow.
So what you call it, the devil's
a
foot?
devil float,
I
yeah.
haven't heard that term before.
Yeah. And when you do that, it basically leaves tiny little
Circles.
grooves in the surface, and then the finish coat holds to that. Because of what you've got with lime plaster, if you remember, it's all physical key. There's no gluing involved in it. There's no chemical set that says it can glue to one another, each coat. So every coat has to, that's why a scratch coat is a scratch coat, because it's heavily scratched. When you see it, when you see how we do it, you'll be like, wow, that's really crazy that you have to do it like that, but that's the only way it works. So you can't do that with the level coat, because that would telegraph through the finish. You'd be able to see those lines of a heavy scratch on the finish, so you do it with a devil float to make small lines, and also it makes sure the surface is relatively flat, because again, that's to do with putting the next coat on, the finish coat, at a relatively even thickness, or you have problems with that. You get a lot of shrinkage, or you have stuff that grins through if you don't do the coating properly, so it can be problematic. Yeah, I would say to everybody, it's kind of a good point to talk about. Don't just buy something and jump at it, because it's invariably going to go wrong. You're not going to have, you know, people buy things to save them, and it's great, but then you realise it's going to be very expensive, very time consuming. You know, I know people have constraints, maybe having a family or things like that, and they want things to be done, but I would say always have a solid plan before you do anything. Don't just go at stuff, because you're going to end up causing yourself, the house, probably the local community, some kind of issues within doing it that way. And you know, all the successful projects I've ever been on are ones that have had more lead time planning than on-site work. So
What's that expression? Failing to plan is planning to fail?
that's right, yes. So it's, you know, so, you know, having that conversation with these guys, you know, and this place needs to be, the other thing is, nobody understands how wet these places get when there's a hole in the roof, and how long it takes to dry out. You know, I was saying to Brighton, I did a project called Doddington Hall. It had a failed slate roof on it that was leaking literally every time it rained, thousands of gallons, and it was like that for 3 years. They put a new slate roof on it, £5.5 million worth of slate roof, so it's probably, in those days, probably $10 million just for the roof.
Yeah.
And we waited 5 years, because it was stuccoed on the outside, and said we're going to let it dry out for 5 years. We went and stuccoed it, and the moisture from the stucco reanimated all the moisture in the core of the wall. It was a solid stone masonry wall, and blew all the stucco off within 18 months. So we went and did a £600,000 project job, which within a year and a half was basically lying on the floor. And the client was not very happy, obviously. You know, we weren't very happy, because immediately people were like, oh, what did you do wrong? And the engineer came and said there's still 65% moisture in the masonry walls. You can't, you know, that's after 5 years of it being capped and dry.
That's amazing.
You know, been allowed to breathe. So, you know, like I said earlier, patience is a really good thing in these situations. You know, with a wooden frame house, not so much. It's okay. But we'll see some stuff upstairs when we go up there that you need to be aware of. But if you have a masonry house, you know, you have to be really, that stuff stays in the walls for a long time, that wet. So we're going to take some of these laths out of the bottom, and I'm going to take the insulation out, and then we're going to re-lath it, and I'm going to show you how to clean up the mortar between the laths, how to lath properly, and then we can get a scratch coat on here. And then later, maybe tomorrow morning or maybe later, depending on what time we've got, we can start on showing you how to use the the conservation plaster magic material that just arrived, thanks to Dean, wherever he is, that we can save as much of this plaster as possible. There's no reason why plaster like this has to be, I mean, this is pretty solid. I have to say this bit here is solid, so I'm not worried about that. But this, the leading edge, there's no reason why you need to take that off. It's like running sand. You'll start to take that off, and then the next bit will need to be taken off, and then the next bit, and then the next thing you know, all your plaster's in the middle of the room and you've just got exposed laths anyway. It's a nonsense, it's unnecessary. It's bad for the environment, it's bad for you, it's bad for the house, you don't need to do it. It's not necessary. So
What about the insulation behind it that got wet?
yeah, we're going to get rid of it.
You can do that without taking off the plaster.
No.
Suck it out?
No, but I would suggest if you do think that you have wet insulation in between the gap of the masonry and the wall, or the wall and the plaster, that you might want to take the bottom 12 inches of plaster off, take that insulation out. This insulation is doing no good to this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
They usually sink anyway.
yeah, it's going to sink. It's just going to be all at the bottom. It's even if you left it in there and it dried out, for probably 4 or 5 months, it's going to stink to high heaven because it's full of all sorts of horrible stuff. It may possibly be bad for you once it's dried out and starts to dust into the building. You never know. At least now when it's damp, you know, it's pretty controlled. It's just take it out. So I need a hammer. We had a question earlier about insulation. I'm actually a big fan of sheep's wool insulation. It's kind of difficult to get in the US. There is 1 or 2 places where you can get it. Not only do you have an amazing product that has a great U value, is completely natural because of the lanolin. It's also pest resistant. You won't get bugs in it. It's already pretty much coming off anyway, so I would go maybe 18 inches 2 feet up. And it may be that you can salvage these laths if you really want to. I would keep, I mean, that's a okay lath. I wouldn't throw it away. I would put it somewhere dry so it doesn't, there's no reason. It looks, you know, it doesn't have mold on it. It doesn't.
You have to have termite feeder.
Yeah.
It does not have mold on it.
I would say mold because the problem with mold is the spores. They'll stay dormant for years and years and years. And as soon as you put wet plaster on them, even though you're using lime plaster, it's going to activate the spore. But you can see how much moisture is still in the, I mean, that's crazy amount of water. You don't really insulate if you don't need to. You know, these houses were built and lived in for hundreds of years through probably much worse winters than we've been having for the last 20 years. So, you know, we'd use our technology such as it exists to do things much more efficiently through energy conservation and how we heat our homes as opposed to how we insulate homes. Also, lime plaster is a very good insulator. It's it's basically limestone that you've put back onto the wall. It's also extremely fire resistant. Double layer of gypboard sheetrock, 2 hours. If you hold up a blowtorch against a 3-coat system of lime plaster, you'd probably age about 5 years before you got anything to go through it. It's literally the BRE, the Building Research Establishment in the United Kingdom, put a 9-hour fire rating on a 2-coat lime system back in '99. And actually, before the plaster failed, the lath started to char from the heat that was being been transmitted. And this kind of stuff isn't going to help. You know, all this dust and horrible crap that you get behind walls like this. I find it's distressing to know that somebody intentionally on purpose did it without, again, thinking about what they were doing to the building. You know, so again, as I said downstairs, please think about stuff, plan, you know, not just you, because if you're doing a building that's been around for 100 years, you may pass it on to your next generation, or somebody might buy it and they might want it for 100 years or pass on to their generation. So it's kind of a custodial thing. Be aware of what you're doing. So now, lathing. How many people have got laths in their house?
Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. This is it. So who wants to talk about it then? Everybody thinks it's really old-fashioned, doesn't work, doesn't do anything. I disagree. We're all looking at it. Everybody in this room has got some lath and plaster walls. So, you know, and they've been up for 100 years. With this, as I said earlier, some of the stuff those laths that we've taken out, for me, I would put them somewhere dry. You know, every bundle of lath that you can save, you're saving yourself $20 from wherever, Home Depot or wherever you're going to buy laths from. So if you have 50 of those laths, that's going to save you $20. So, you know, not that I'm a miser, but also it's also been part of the building as well. It's like taking fireplaces away, and, you know, it's a basic A to Z. These, I'll show you how to fix these back. What I do now that we've got a void here, these, the plaster, it's failed here on this nexus, probably because it was so damp. I was talking earlier about walls being okay, that gravity generally keeps them up. There's obviously been an intervention in this wall, which has been the cellulose insulation. It's been massively damp, so it's weakened the plaster, and it's probably rotted out the existing original hair on this bit here on the nexus. So it's sheared. So what you've got is basically a sheet of plaster that's just stood up on its edge, and then maybe something, you know, somebody's put their foot through or something happened, something struck it, it's fallen down. So when I have a piece like this, what I normally do is this is a drywall knife, saw. So I just, basically what you want to do is you want to get rid of any plaster that's in there has to go, because these spaces are the areas that the plaster is going to adhere to. So normally it comes out pretty easy. You know, there might be one or two. It might take a little bit of while to get through, but as much as you can get off it, I would get out. You know, it's going to be beneficial to get as much of this stuff out as possible. And you can see it's already broken anyway. It's not, you're not gaining anything. You can't, no benefit to keeping that. There's only one part of this plaster here that's physically moving, and we can glue that back. I know we had to take a little bit off there to get the laths out, but that's unavoidable. But this here, that we can glue that back. This, the only problem you've got, everybody says, do a knock test. So you go around with your knuckles and you knock on every inch of your plaster wall, and you start getting paler and paler and paler, because every inch of your solid plaster wall sounds like it has a huge void behind it. Which, you know what, guess what it does, because it's just on stud wall with lath on it, and there's a big air gap behind there.
And they
So
really don't have insulation back here.
no,
I guess on the
so
outside.
I don't follow the tap
Okay.
rule, because I'm not an acoustical engineer, and I can't tell the difference between a tap on a solid piece of plaster and a tap on a piece of plaster that's just got a stud wall or a standard Latham background. Even I can't do that. I've done this for 30 years. So I physically press on everything. And I find that if it moves, I'd get a piece of chalk probably and just mark it with a piece of chalk, which we'll do later. I've got some chalk down there. So, and then, because what happens is you end up forgetting where it was, and if you don't mark it, you'll curse yourself. So
Where'd you get these left?
those, they're from a Home Depot.
Home Depot.
Yeah, and they do have them, and you know, surprisingly enough, even though Home Depot is a huge behemoth of an organisation, if you go to the store manager and say, I want 150 of those packs, you can get a decent discount from them. I tried it thinking that I was just being cheeky, and the guy was like, yeah, we'll talk about it, and I was like, wow, okay, you know. So it's worth a try, you know, nothing ventured, nothing gained and all that. So when there's plaster in situ, I would never nail it, because as soon as that hammerhead hits the lath, you're going to bounce or break the keys on the existing lath. So I always use screws and if I'm screwing into patches, I always use screws as well. So, and I just use these kind of construction screws. I'm not, you know, they're general purpose construction screws. There's nothing special about them. You can buy stainless steel screws if you want. You're just costing yourself a lot of money. You know, you probably spend 2 days running around trying to find stainless steel screws. You'll get halfway through the job, run out of screws, and then not be able to find any stainless steel screws. So you'll end up 1.5 inch, 1.25 is about right, because the lath itself is 1/4 inch, 3/8. So you'll need a good fix on the uprights, because technically the lath is going to hold the weight of not just the plaster but all the water while it's curing. So if dry plaster weighs, I think 11 or 12 pounds per square foot, and you've got twice as much water in there, you've got 30 pounds of plaster per square foot. Plaster and water per square foot. So this, like all building techniques and all building ideas, foundation is always the best way to start. If you skip this, or you just get bored with it and just want to get on with it, it will come back to bite you. You'll find that your plaster is lying on the floor and the lath is having a party, John, you know. So I wouldn't necessarily need to pre-drill this stuff. It doesn't matter if they split, doesn't matter if they... Try not to... As long as the head of the screw, like everything, goes in. They've put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 laths in, and then alternated between the studs, so that there's never, when you're lathing, you never want a straight line on the stud, because immediately, if you've done your plaster, the water will change, it'll make the timber warp a little bit, and it'll crack out immediately down that straight line. So that when you're doing lathing, you alternate them. Some people do 6, some people do 8, some people do 10. As long as you alternate it, it doesn't really matter. I wouldn't go over 10 personally, because I've seen people that have done 15 and it's like this, like a Lego up their wall. Now the other thing I notice here, the gapping, which is really kind of important. I was always taught that the gap in the lath should be the thickness of the lath. So that's fine. That's not so good. That's just about fine. Borderline. Good, maybe a little bit too big. Fine, fine. Terrible. Because what you've got there, basically you've got a plank of wood that your plaster has to try and spread itself over. in these circumstances, there's not much you can do about it. You can actually get your drywall saw and take a little bit of edge off if you really want to. I would say, as I said earlier, if there's that kind of a problem and there's a square foot of it, you need to really address it before you do your plaster work. If there's less than a square foot like this, these above and below will hold the plaster. But, you know, be aware that this gapping is integral to how the plaster stays up, because it's the keys, the way that the plaster curls behind it. That's the physical attachment of all traditional plaster. So you don't, you know, and even gypsum plaster, if you do a ceiling or a wall with gypsum plaster, a lot of pre-1960 walls have studs, wood studs and metal lath. So, and that lath is that's the key. Even though the plaster itself, the gypsum is glued itself together, it still needs those little nobules behind in the lath to physically hold itself up. So here, at the bottom here, I'll move out of the way, I would already say that putting a lath like that right across, like they were originally, that's going to be fine. And then you get down to here and follow it down to wherever it goes in there. Next one up. That'll be fine as well. So, but the next set of laths, I would start at this end and run however far I can get them onto either this one or, you know, to try and they'll probably come
I don't think you're going to get that far.
here. So, you know, do that and then fill this in with some cut laths. Take out any of the old nails as well. They're gonna, you know, make sure you get a tetanus shot and things like that, because it's not good for you. So, so I don't know if anybody wants to have a go at this. What I do normally is I would cut a little bit of the lath . And use it as a spacer, so that when I put the next lath on, I would use that as a spacer and then maybe screw in this one next and then come back to this one. So it's, because you can see here, this is a Friday afternoon job. Yeah, they'd already been on nipping the whiskey when they kind of finish this off. It's kind of, it may be that the building's moved, settled, and it's taken the laths with it, but I would imagine that, you know, it's kind of, and it's a pretty boring job, to be honest. When you've done a few hundred square feet of this, it's not something to write home about. But I would definitely use a spacer, because what you'll find is otherwise, however good you think you are and however good your eyes are, you'll really, it'll start tracking out. And then you'll get to the bottom and you'll have to cut a little wedge out of the last lath. So again, water is the key to everything. Seems very strange as the plaster is wet, but you can see that the lath is going to already start sucking the water in. Some people actually plaster onto dry lath, but they use a much wetter plaster, and that's it's a highly skilled job then, because trying to keep it on your trowel and your hawk,
Does that save the time?
it doesn't save any time in the end, because you still have to wait for the coat to carbonate before you go on to the next coat. So it's not. Okay, has anybody ever used a hawk control? Hands up. Yes? Well, you probably let yourself in for a, you're going first. I normally, I take that much off. A lot of people I know will get a bigger amount, but I find I'd rather do small and often than kind of go crazy, especially if I've got a big job lined up. You know, it's kind of, that's substantially heavy, that. And this is what I said to you before, when I'm up with a trowel, I constantly work in the material so that it's forming that kind of smooth, and basically just take a little bit off the trowel and hawk like that. Everybody saw that, right? Now yeah, everybody saw that. Kristen will show you how to do it. It's all in the wrist. Scoop it off. When you're doing lath and plaster, several techniques kind of work. Some people do it straight down the lath, and to try and get that curl. I've always been taught to go diagonally across the lath. Now, first pass, doesn't matter how much you put on there, as long as you get something on it, because you can always add to it. So I wouldn't worry if you start to see laths coming through like that. On your next pass, you'll be able to put the plaster there and go along and just do a little bit of diagonal work on it. So if you need to do a little bit of if you get bored, you can always plaster the opposite way. Keeps your mind busy while you're stood in front of a monotonous wall plastering. So there you go. And the only way you're going to learn this now is picking up a hawk and a trowel and going for it. So who's going to be brave enough to give it the first shot? See the thickness of this plaster here?
Yeah.
So you have to use your eyes to kind of, no, we'll probably do 1.5 on this. So tomorrow we'll do what they call a tight coat to get it flat, and then we'll just skim it with a very thin skim coat, because this is quite thin, this plaster.
Yeah.
I wouldn't overwork it. Once you've got it on, walk away from it, get onto your next bit. The key is to make it as what we call as fatty as possible on the hawk. So work it as much as you can on the hawk to get that nice smooth outside. And that means it's going to stick to the lath. What you need to happen is for the material to go through and curl with the pressure that you're putting on. So that's why
you're putting more pressure on the top.
I use the back of the trowel, and then because if you use the full face of the trowel, what happens is the hydroscopic pressure pulls the plaster back off the wall. So.
Okay. Is this?
Yeah.
You don't want it to be too smooth, right?
No, at the moment, because at the moment what happens next is you're just coating. Yeah, this is the quickest coat out of all of them, because you're just throwing this off, making sure it's fairly even, but you scratch it anyway. So it's got to be rough, you know. This is the coat that effectively makes everything else stick to the wall. So when you do it, try to get the stroke as long as possible, so that makes it even. So just use your shoulder as an arc. If you don't do it like too close to your body, just do it. Yeah, that's it. perfect, Caleb. And you can go over it again like you just did. As long as it stays on the wall, you've got something to work with. It's not a big problem. What you don't want it to do is end up on the floor all the time, because that's really yeah, I think a little bit more pressure. There you go. Horizontally. And this is why, when you look at that now, you'll be like, why did I try and make this so smooth? That guy's ruined it on me. Some people like to be creative with their scratching, you know, so that you go back in 20 years' time and you know who did the plaster work. People do signature scratches and things like that, you know. Usually by this time of the day, and I've done maybe 600 square feet of this stuff, I'm so bushed that I'm like, I'm just going to scratch it and collapse, you know. And tomorrow we can put the laths in there because you're screwing them in, so you're not actually putting any stress on the plaster that you know. So we could just put the laths in there, and tomorrow you could just put that in with a little bit of plaster and it'll be fine. It's not a big deal. I wouldn't, you know, wouldn't stress about that at all. If you put another coat on and scratch it like this, so that that's going to accept the top coat, all these lines will telegraph right through the finish coat. It'll look horrible. So, and also this is not really that flat. So tomorrow we'll put a coat on and we'll get our feather edge. We'll make sure we don't have any high spots or low spots. We'll do a little bit of work on it, and then it'll be ready for the, this'll go off pretty quick, I think, in this temperature. We're in the top of the house as well, so.
If we're going back, when saying going off, we're going back to how fast is a beach towel dry? It's drying.
Yeah.
And it doesn't set, it's not setting, it's drying.
Yeah, drying.
If it dries too quick, that's a problem.
Yeah, there's always a possibility. What'll happen is you'll get what you call a flash dry, and you'll see it. It'll be white. It'll start to go white in patches. And that's when you get your bottle sprayer and you just mist those patches, because what's happening is there's either some draft behind or there's something coming through in the environment that's actually making these flash drying spots, and you need to control those as opposed to trying to catch the rest, or let the rest of it catch up. They need to be slowed down and let everything carbonate at the same time.